Wasabi guys, Void here, come back at y'all with another 10 underrated commander cards. If you're not familiar with the series, what I do is I basically go over 10 cards that I feel like are underplayed or undervalued in the commander format and could definitely see some more play. So let's get right on into it. First one we have here is Spawning Pool. Has the downside of coming into play tapped, however, for basically just 3 mana you have a chump blocker. 2 mana to turn it into a 1/1 and then 1 mana to regenerate it. Regeneration isn't a perfect ability, but what it basically means is that, hey, if your opponent has a huge creature, if it doesn't have trample, you basically just throw this in front of it and regenerate it, and there you go. You get to block their best creature. Doesn't have the creature type benefits of something like a Mutavault, but it has its usefulness. The fact that it comes into play tap means it's probably never going to see modern play. It's too slow. It is pretty decent enough to see play in Commander. The next we have Infiltration Lens. 1 mana to play it and 1 mana to equip it. So basically whenever a creature that is equipped with it becomes blocked, you get to draw 2 cards. Which is actually pretty decent. It's not going to give your creature all this evasion or any good keywords. It's just going to make it to where if your opponents block it, you get 2 cards. That's pretty decent for 1 mana and 1 mana to equip. Throw this on your best creature. I mean, if you're playing a good equipment based deck, this is far from the worst equipment to choose from, especially if you're playing on a budget. It's not going to compete with the swords or anything like that, but it's going to give you some extra card draw. In a lot of Voltron decks, that is a huge downside, is that there just isn't enough speed, and drawing cards is always a good thing in any deck, really, so definitely worth considering for future decks. The next card I have here is Prison Term. For 3 mana, you basically just arrest a creature. Its activated abilities can't be activated, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you get to then reattach Prison Term to that creature. So it's not just a throw it on the best creature for now, it's hey, whenever their best creature comes onto the field, you attach it to it. So that versatility and the fact that it isn't just your typical arrest effect, where you're basically just dealing with 1 creature for now, the fact that it's good in the late game also is super useful, and in a multiplayer game, you can definitely hate on multiple players, and it makes the game a little bit more political, so it is definitely a card that could see more play. I think people want to go for just removal as opposed to these prison type effects. But it's definitely a good card for control. And then we have Pristine Angel. As long as Pristine Angel's untapped, it has protection from artifacts and from all colors. And whenever you cast a spell, you get to untap Pristine Angel. So basically what it's going to do is just going to block for you all day. It has protection from all colors and from artifacts, and that is the majority of creatures in the format, with the exception of Eldrazi's, of course. But I mean, it's still a good blocker, and the fact is you can attack with it, cast a spell, untap it, so it has pseudo-vigilance. It isn't perfect, but what it can do for you is just give you that line of defense, give you a pretty solid angel tribal, anything like that. It's not terrible, it's not fantastic, but not terrible. And then we have Voidmeet Husher. Does it look familiar? It might look familiar. Yeah, Voidmeet Husher is 4 mana, but with flash, so the fact is, you can play this at instant speed, so that's a huge upside. It's a 2/2, so it's not going to do too much in combat. Comes into play, you get to counter a target activated ability. And whenever you play a spell, you get to return Voidmeet Husher to its owner's hand. So you have a constantly reusable way of dealing with activated abilities. It can shut down a ton of artifacts. It can shut down some lands with activated abilities. As long as it's not a mana ability, that's the only downside to it, is that it can't counter mana abilities. But it can counter every other activated ability, which is pretty good because Planeswalker abilities are technically activated abilities. That's pretty hilarious when you can shut down the Planeswalker deck at the table. And having a way to bring it back to your hand just by casting spells, it's pretty solid. And definitely something I should have put on the list a long time ago, at least for one of these videos. It's a pretty good card. It doesn't see enough play. I wouldn't say it's something I would throw into a Wizard Tribal deck, but definitely if you're looking for that extra way to deal with activated abilities, let's just say your playgroup's a little specific and you have to deal with a lot of Planeswalkers, well, this is a perfect card. And then we have Fathom Trawl. For 5 mana, you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal 3 non-land cards. Put the non-land cards revealed this way into your hand, and then put the rest of the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in any order. This is a very underrated card for what it does. 3 non-land cards for just 5 mana is pretty solid, especially if you're playing a deck where it's not about any individual card, but you're just getting the 3 good cards. That's all that really matters. Super Friends decks are pretty good when you can get to 3 different Planeswalkers. I like that idea. I also like this in Control. I mean, getting multiple different removal spells or counter spells to your hand for just 5 mana, that's pretty good. It's not perfect. It does have the ability to just give you the worst possible options. But the fact that it is non-land cards means that you already know that you're not going to be stuck with any crappy lands, things that you don't need. Late game, this is the type of card that you want, especially when you're all about thinning your deck out, getting to what you need. It's not perfect, but it's pretty solid for what it does. And then we have Jinn of Seeing Winds. 10 mana, super expensive, but hear me out. The Jinn are actually very underrated in this format. There are 5 total Jinn, and this one is actually my favorite because what it does is just insane. It has the divinity counter on it, and it's indestructible as long as it has the divinity counter, so you can wait a whole turn to do this. Wait till your opponent's end step. It's going to block for you all day. It has indestructible. Remove the divinity counter right before your turn, so you get to draw as many cards equal to the number of permanents you control. That's including your lands. Your lands are considered permanents. Tokens are considered permanents. You are capable of just drawing a ton of cards. Easily, you can draw 20 cards. And all of that off of just removing a divinity counter. That's pretty insane. Well, I wouldn't say it's optimal for a lot of the control decks that want to do that. It's definitely a pretty solid card for what it's going to do. Drawing 20 cards, drawing 20 plus cards during your opponent's end step right before your turn, so you don't have to discard a ton of cards, that is amazing. I could definitely see this in something like an Animar deck. I mean, huge cost reduction. You're just going to be paying 3 blue for it for the most part. And getting a ton of card draw in that deck is never a bad thing, so the fact that this hasn't seen more play than what it already does is just a little confusing to me. Then we have Disturbed Burial. For 2 mana and a buyback of 3, you can return a target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I think that buyback might actually be one of the most underrated abilities in this entire game. Having a buyback off of an instant or sorcery means that if you get into the late game and you just have a ton of mana, this is effectively a mana sink, and you could just keep bringing back creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Well, I wouldn't say it's as good as a recursion-based card that could just bring it back to the battlefield. It's definitely a good way to keep yourself in the game and stabilize. You're getting a ton of different options from your graveyard. Early game, it's useless, yeah, but late game, it's incredible. Just 5 mana each time you want to do this, too, so yeah, there are some cheaper options that just put it right back to your hand, but you don't get to reuse those cards. This gives you a buyback, and you could just do this over and over again. I mean, this is what helps you grind out games, and it's what helps you win games, too. Recursion's amazing in Commander. I think it's a pretty good card. And then we have Slaughter. Yet another amazing buyback, but this one is for life, so it is a little bit more risky. Basically, you get to destroy a target non-black creature, and it can't be regenerated. And that's all for 4 mana at instant speed. It's not fantastic. I typically don't think that just creature removal is great in this format. I think you need some more versatile removal, but for mono black, you don't really have a lot of non-creature removal anyway, so why not just get the best possible creature removal you can get? This doesn't exile creatures, but destroying non-black creatures is pretty common. When you can pay 4 life and bring that same instant back to your hand, just get the same exact removal over and over again, that's pretty solid. Black doesn't always have the best way of recurring instants and sorceries from the graveyard. If you have something aside from just creature recursion that can constantly bring this back to your hand, I mean, that's pretty good. And then the last card we have here is Vertol the Ancient. For 6 mana, you get a 4/7 Tree Folk legendary creature, but you get to pay a kicker cost of X, and Sapperling creatures and other Tree Folk get +1/+1, so a lot of flavor there. If you want to make a Tree Folk tribal deck with Doran the Siege Tower, this is definitely something I would recommend. Gives an Anthem for Tree Folk and Sapperlings. And when Vertol the Ancient enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you get to put X 1/1 green Sapperling creature tokens onto the battlefield. So another good place to put this in would be something like Gave Guru of Spores, where he's an activated ability of making little 1/1 green Sapperling creature tokens anyway. So in a deck like that, where it's all about getting Sapperling tokens too, getting an Anthem for all of those is also pretty nice. So he's an Anthem built in for your Tree Folk too. But yeah, you could dump a ton of mana. Mana sinks are always good in Commander, and why not just dump it all into the kicker cost there? Pretty good use of mana. So anyway, guys, that was 10 more underrated Commander cards. Let me know what you think about this list. Feel free to leave any suggestions, cards you think are underrated, cards that could see more play in this format. Please let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here, signing off.